Hi, in today's video, we'll see what is encapsulation in Java. So now we'll not go with a typical textbook definition. Let's try to understand encapsulation with some code examples. So this is my main class called as encapsulation demo. And to demonstrate this concept, I'll create one more class called class student. So when we create the student class, we need certain attributes for that. So every student will have, we'll take some of the mandatory columns. Every student will have ID, student ID, and name and age. So these are the three basic attributes every student will have. Now I'm just creating an object of student class just to access the variables. Using the new student keyword, you can create the object of student class. And this is just a reference to access these variables. I'm creating an object and I'm just using this as a key reference. So what I can do is I can set s1 dot id. I'll set some random number 1. Then s1 dot name. I'll select some name. Sachin. Okay, let's keep Sachin. We'll keep his id as then okay. And his age. So 45. Okay. Now I'll create age. Okay, age is an integer, so we give it in double quotes. Now we created one object. We are setting all the values. But if you see this column, an ID is a one-time updatable and you cannot update the value again and again. So only name and age will be changing, but ID is not updatable. But how can we achieve that? So now initially I'm setting age as 10. Now again I can make the ID as 15. For some reason, okay, I'll make it as 0. Or I'll make s1 dot ID is null. Or I'll keep it as blank. It is happening as one dot. Okay, we'll keep my ideas. But if you see practically, an ID cannot be a 0 or a negative number. I'll just keep some negative number also. -1. But is this really possible? Yes, see, compiler is not giving any error, but in real time, we cannot assign an ID as 0 or -1. But how to achieve this? So to restrict that, in Java, we have so only we have this encapsulation concept. So what we can do, right? Now all these columns are public. Anyone who creates a student object can update or use all of these variables. To restrict that, I'll just make it as private. Now if you see, as soon as I made this column as private, I'm getting error for all these three columns. Wherever I'm using the ID column, s1.id is equal to 10 for the initial value and for updation. See, now it's in compile time error. So it's easy to catch the compile time error rather than the runtime error. So if you're not making this as private, someone has set -1, and if you see in the when you pull the data or if you call this, it will show as -1, and it will be difficult, like who updated and why they updated. This is illogic. So I'll just make this as private. But now, okay, so now you made this as private, but how to update the private variables? But there are some situations. Okay, initially you set this as 0. Okay, now later you need to update to correct value like 1. Since this is a private variable, we cannot update. What to do? So only we have this getters and setters in Java. Getters and setters. So using this method, even though if this ID column or any column, whichever is a private, using this getters and setters, we can update these values. I'll show it. Oh, we now these are error showing error. So normally you can write the code to when you can write the method for getters and setters, but instead of doing that, nowadays in all of the IDs by default it will get auto populated. So just select the column name, right click, go to source. We have this getters, generate getters and setters, and it will show for which column we need to have the getters and setters. Now since the ID column is private, select that column. Now code is generated. I'll just refactor that just for readable purpose. So now we have two columns, like first is getters and then setters. Okay. So now the code is generated for both getters and setters. So now we do not have, I mean, since we have void, so there is no return type. Here there is no void, so we have return type. So this return type should be based on the data type what you mentioned here. This is different concept. We'll see in the methods. But for now, whenever you make any column as private, and if we need to update, we need to use getters and setters. So to set the ID, we keeping it as set ID, and to get the ID, we are keeping it as get ID. See, these are the method names, and it can be anything. It can be set ID 123, get ID 1234. This name doesn't matter, but to keep meaningful name for some logical purposes. So you written the code, and if someone want to read your code, it should be some meaningful. If they come and say like get one to set 123, what I mean they'll think. So it should be some meaningful name. So we'll keep it as get ID and set ID for the private columns. Set ID. Now instead of updating the value directly, we'll be calling that method. So s1 dot, since already we created the object and s1 is reference. So like however we call this object, right? When we with this field name in a similar manner, just type the reference s1 and just type set id, or just type control space. It will show set id. Now I'm passing it as 10. Now whatever you're passing, right, you need to get that. Since it's returning, so you create one more object. So this ID is specific to this column. Since the scope of this variable is only for this class, since you made this as private, the scope of this ID column is specific to the student class. So I'll create one more column called ID. So I'll just type ID dot s1 dot get ID. So whatever we are passing, we'll see if it's the same ID is being written or not. So for that, sys out, just try to print that. Okay, okay, okay. So we are printing the object reference. Okay, it should be ID. So then it's getting printed, student ID. But now wait. So now since we made this as private and we are using the getters and setters to update. But what happens if we still set this to 0? Okay, I not to here. I'm just after setting, I just make it as 0. Since you made it as private and you're using getters and setters, but still we can update values, right? Then what is the use of getters and setters? Same, right? Even if you make it as private or public, still you're able to update and you're able to give some wrong values, which is not meaningful. Now the actual use of encapsulation comes into picture. Since if it is a direct variable, you cannot add any logic to this column. Now this column or ID is associated with a method called getID and setID. Now I can write logic within this method. Only if the student ID is greater than 0, then assign the value, or else print the message in console telling the ID should be greater than 0. So this is a method. I'm just updating this logic here. ID should be greater than 0. Only if it is greater than 0, assign this value. Else, print error. ID should be greater than 0. See now, initially you set the ID as 10, and if you try to assign 0, now we are getting error message in the console, error. ID should be, there is some warnings. Now I'm printing this in the console, but in real time, we can throw some exceptions like some illegal exceptions we can throw that will cover in the throw exceptions classes. Now you got right. Whenever a column which if we need to restrict that from outside world not to update, make it as private, and with help of getters and they can update, but still we can have some additional logic to be applied. The ID cannot should be now. The ID should be greater than 0. Now coming to the name column. So now I can now ID some okay now name is Sachin, right? Now someone made it as blank. Again, this is not logically correct. A name cannot be null. So again, for this, we can make it as private. Since you made this as private, it will show warning here. The scope, the scope is not available. Um, so for that, what you can just right click, source, generate getters and setters for this name column. Now in the set name, okay, on the set name, right, we can add one more logic. If name is equal to null, or if name is equal to blank, null value cannot be assigned to name. On this else block, you just assign the value. So this is how we apply encapsulation. Make the column as private, use getters and setters, and in getters and setters apply some logic so that a wrong value will not get updated for a private variable. Yeah, thank you friends.